The once mighty Assyrian Empire was now waning in power, and the Babylonians were rapidly filling the political vacuum. All the while, Egypt continued in her quest for domination, frequently campaigning northeast to secure a buffer zone between the Nile Valley and her Mesopotamian adversaries. In his lifetime, the prophet Jeremiah witnessed fierce battles over the control of his homeland, as Israel was sandwiched between giants. The disaster that seemed imminent was rapidly approaching, and it came with full force during the reign of King Zedekiah, the last descendant of David to sit upon Jerusalem's throne. Against the recommendations of Jeremiah, Zedekiah sided with the Egyptians and rebelled against Babylon. It was only a matter of time before Nebuchadnezzar marched west, destroyed Jerusalem, and led her inhabitants eastward to exile. Archaeology, as Dr. James Fleming will soon point out, has shown that the inhabitants of Israel after the exile adhered to Jeremiah's warning against the worship of foreign gods. Now Dr. Fleming discusses with Bishop Richard B. Wilkie the rise and fall of empires.
Jim, this seems to be a good time in our study to stop and do an overview. Jeremiah seems to be an appropriate moment to pause because he saw Babylon coming. Could you, with great sweeping strokes, describe the rise and fall of the empires from the time of David and Solomon, when the temple was first built, down to the destruction of the first temple?
Well, David marks the beginning of the millennium, 1000 BC. That kingdom which Solomon controlled was the largest in Israelite history. It went beyond Damascus in the north, all the way to the Arabian desert to the east, down to the Gulf of Aqaba in the south, the brook of Egypt to the west. But even then, we need to remember there's pockets of enemies surrounding the Israelites. The immediate neighbors were from clockwise. We have on the north, of course, the Phoenicians, then the Ammonites, the Moabites, in the south, the Edomites, Philistines on the west. They had taken land earlier from the Israelite tribes, and now this land, had been taken back away from them. So David's son Solomon achieved dominance in trade relations with all of the nations around him. He sealed these agreements, remember, with marriages. These wives brought their pagan courtesans and priests with them to Jerusalem. Remember, this was to the dismay of the prophets. Jerusalem now had many different cultic shrines in its environs. In times of religious apostasy, these high places proved a powerful temptation for the Hebrews.
According to the prophets, Israel could survive only with a steadfast loyalty to God and to God alone. Unity, justice, compassion, these were essential in their eyes. So when Solomon violated the covenant with foreign gods and oppressive behavior, he really set the stage for the tragic division of Israel into the north and the south, which followed.
Yes, this disunity would cost the country its very life. As soon as civil war broke out between Israel, remember Jeroboam, and Judah, Rehoboam, this was 931 to 926 BC. Then Damascus, and then Edom revolted. Do you remember next? Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt attacked Judah. He tried to break the Israelite trade monopoly, exacted a heavy tribute. Remember, that's a nice word for ransom. From Rehoboam of Judah.
The land of Israel was very important. It's very strategic as well as economically important. I know it's been called the land between. It was trampled on by, I think, all the armies of history. Help us understand what happens after the division of the kingdom around 900 BC.
Okay. In the 800s, we have the powerful house of Omri, and it moved the northern capital from Tirzah to the northwest. You can view Phoenicia.
This is the northern kingdom.
Yes, and Phoenicia means your eye is toward Baal. King Ahab, remember, the son of Omri, marries Jezebel. who unfortunately had 450 prophets of Baal in her baggage. Elijah had something to say about that.
Right.
Ahab also fought Aram of Damascus, and he was able to hold all of Transjordan.
Ahab was quite a builder. In the Old Testament, he was, you might say, an equivalent of Herod the Great in the New Testament.
We're finding Ahab's building projects and excavations all over Israel. He even was able to contribute 2,000 chariots and a 10,000 army to help the Egyptians who wanted to have a battle against the rising Assyrians at Karkar, 853 BC. But at the end of Ahab's reign, he lost some of his kingdom to Damascus, also some to Moab. These military failures is important for us to realize. It makes people reevaluate their gods.
If you have a defeat, you wonder whether your gods have any
still
power.
protecting you. Of course, this was Baal, and Baal didn't protect you. So the subsequent king Jehu was able to destroy all of Ahab's Baal system that he'd brought in, and as a light of that, Israel lost its Baal-worshipping Phoenician ally.
So they downgraded the Baal, but they lost Phoenicia as an ally.
Yes, yes. Judah will have also become an ally of Assyria as well. And Israel is going to find itself very vulnerable. In terms of world politics, it seemed politically wise for Judah to distance itself from Israel at this time.
Now, during the last third of the 8th century, the Assyrian military power was really increasing. Military conquest became a way of life for the Assyrians. They were a brutal people. They amassed a huge, how big an army?
Generally 100,000, but it could be 200,000.
And they could obtain just about any military objective. Wasn't it about the first really military-based empire in the world?
Yes, it was. Yes.
The first campaign in 733 was against the northern tribes, the most northern tribes of Israel.
Yes. They're the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun. They might be the reference for that famous text we all know from Handel's Messiah in Isaiah 9:2. These people saw and walked in a terrible darkness and were most deserving of a great light. The very next year, Tiglath-Pileser III.
That's the one they call Pul.
Yes. But he took Damascus. Subsequent Syrian kings take credit for that terrible 3-year siege, famine, and fall of Samaria. Remember, that's 724 to 721 BC.
And that was the end, really, of the northern kingdom.
Of the northern kingdom. So now Judah's alone. During the reign of King Hezekiah, Judah stops paying tribute to Assyria. The Syrians had a very simple foreign policy: extort as much as you can, keep the vassal nations in constant fear of Assyrian invasion. But, of course, Judah, not Jerusalem, will be decimated by Sennacherib in his invasion in 701. And this trauma probably facilitated Hezekiah being followed by the bad king Manasseh. Remember, he encouraged the people to turn away from the God of Israel. He also turned to Tyre, which means he's reintroducing Baal. And
Baal's coming back again under Manasseh.
And it's because they had lost so many towns to Sennacherib, so they're ready for another god.
Ancient battles were not just contests between armies, were they?
No, they are actually battles between the gods of the respective peoples as well. The Assyrian god of war is Nergal. He's mentioned in 2 Kings 1730. This is one of the shrines built in Samaria after the Assyrians occupy it. A major god of war in Canaan is Resheph. This god is a dual god of war and plague. Plagues followed wars. Do you remember that Manasseh restored the cults on the southern extension of the Mount of Olives, called the Hill of Corruption?
The Mount of Olives. I'd forgotten. The Mount of Olives was called the Hill of Corruption.
Because
of the high places.
These cultic places were built. When Solomon built them, Israelites were not worshiping there. But now, in Manasseh's time, Moabite and Ammonite gods of warfare are being honored there. In whom will the Israelites trust for salvation? Should Judah appease the foreign gods of war or not? Manasseh said, yes, appease them. King Josiah said, no, and he tore down those temples. So for the prophets, winning or losing a battle does not imply that the God of Israel was weak or strong. They were trying to help the people understand God is the God Most High. God uses the nations for God's purposes and the world.
Jeremiah knew that the pot was boiling up north.
Yeah.
He knew even before the politicians that Babylon now was entering the scene. And even though he paused during the reign of Josiah, hoping for a revitalization, a spiritual reappraisal, he quickly realized the reforms were superficial. Then when Josiah was killed and the Egyptians imposed a heavy tribute on Jerusalem, then he began his prophecy again. And now came the Babylonians.
Right.
The Babylonians defeated Pharaoh at Carchemish in 605. And then Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Philistines and the Syrians. And the end finally came to Jerusalem, the temple, and the city, just as Jeremiah had foretold. The temple was burned to the ground. The leaders were taken into Babylonian captivity. Jeremiah had cautioned that there was not going to be any peace in a country that had played loose and fast with the gods and forgot the Mosaic covenant. Jim, can we spot anything from archaeological finds to show the Hebrews learned anything from this experience?
Well, the biblical texts say that there was national introspection by the waters of Babylon, where the people wept, torn from their land. It's probably impossible to imagine what the destruction of Jerusalem was like for the people. The captivity cured the Israelites of idolatry. Images to the pagan deities of Israel's neighboring countries are found, even in Judah, permeating the strata before the captivity. But we do not find idols in the strata of the return.
None at all.
While they are uprooted and torn from their land, the Israelites discerned what could be called a reversal of fortune spirituality that affirmed that God could still bless and be present even during tragedy. We can find this spirituality in Isaiah 40, 29 to 31, where remember God gives strength to the weary, the powerless, and though you walk, you'll not faint. This is the spirituality of many of the Jews from the time of their return from captivity.
Thank you, Jim. That was a great sweep of history, and we're very grateful.